In early July 2025, KRAFTON fired key leadership individuals from their subsidiary game studio, Unknown Worlds, a company that you might recognize as the engineers behind the critically acclaimed survival game franchise, Subnautica. And the three people that KRAFTON just terminated are widely considered as the architects who are directly responsible for bringing Subnautica to life. Charlie Cleveland, the former CEO, game director, and founder of Unknown Worlds, Max McGuire, its co-founder and technical director, and Ted Gill, the company's president. This sparked a massive global outrage from the Subnautica community and caused a, as of writing, still ongoing controversy. And in this video, we're going to take a look at both sides' perspective through the lens of their court filings, with both sides having served each other a legal complaint regarding breach of contracts and more. But I'm not trying to be an essay channel, rather we're trying to reach through that international commentary space, so I'll be giving some of my thoughts on this matter as well. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Just days after the founders' termination from the very company they built, Fortis Advisors, the investment and legal representatives of Unknown Worlds during their acquisition deal into KRAFTON, filed a lawsuit or a complaint against KRAFTON Inc. on behalf of the founders on July 16, 2025 for allegedly breaching their contract to avoid paying a hefty earnout of up to $250 million. This earnout had a caveat that Unknown Worlds first has to earn an undisclosed amount of revenue from the day of the acquisition until December 31st, 2025, which can be extended to June 2026 if both parties agree to the extension. In this filing, the founders alleges that KRAFTON broke multiple agreements stipulated in their EPA or Equity Purchase Agreement, the binding contract in which both parties mutually agree on stipulations regarding acquisition, property rights, responsibilities, deliverables, etc., citing multiple instances of KRAFTON breaking this agreement to strong-arm the studio into delaying Subnautica 2's release from sometime around 2025 to further down to sometime around 2026. The Unknown Worlds founders remain undeterred in their stance that they were actively working on Subnautica 2 and are still adamant that the game has been ready for release into early access for quite some time now, despite multiple attempts from KRAFTON to undermine their titles as leaders by presenting multiple examples and evidence that the founders neglected the project, and even going as far as leaking confidential documents to further counter the founders' narrative. The founders argue that the reason KRAFTON is trying to delay the release of Subnautica 2 is to block them from getting the full $250 million earnout, which is really important because I don't think a lot of people understand that this earnout isn't solely based on Subnautica 2's performance in terms of sales and revenue, but on Unknown Worlds' revenue as a whole. This includes any money earned from their older titles, namely Natural Selection 2, Subnautica Below Zero, and even Moonbreaker, so any revenue earned from any of these titles while Unknown Worlds is under KRAFTON counts towards the earnout. And Subnautica 2 was probably the final push that the developers needed to catch up to the full earnout requirement, with the founders banking on the hype of Subnautica 2's release to earn a significant amount of revenue from not just Subnautica 2, but also continued sales from their older titles, especially for Subnautica's Switch, VR, and mobile versions. On August 15, 2025, KRAFTON filed a countersuit using Unknown Worlds as a proxy, or at least that's what I think is the case, but the actual filer or the plaintiff here is Unknown Worlds. They're alleging that the three founders breached the confidentiality agreement by collectively downloading over 170,000 confidential files on their way out of the door. Unknown Worlds alleges that these downloaded files are real and the founders are in possession of them, which is a huge security risk for the company. The company is demanding for the founders to disclose every file that they quote-unquote stole and have the files be returned to Unknown Worlds along with any company and personal devices, i.e. laptops, iPads, mobile phones, etc. that contains any and all form of confidential data related to Subnautica 2 and Unknown Worlds in general. Within this filing, Unknown Worlds also presents multiple incriminating private conversations between unnamed Unknown Worlds employees and the founders as evidence that two terminated suspected individuals have long neglected their duties and responsibilities, or in their words, have checked out in all but name, alleging that the founders have been passive in regards to Subnautica 2's development and citing their actions as a breach of fiduciary duty, which has caused Unknown Worlds to suffer a number of damages, including the loss of profits. Furthermore, Unknown Worlds alleges that the company's former president, Ted Gill, has been neglecting his duties to better the company and instead put all of his efforts into securing the full amount of the payout. This suit tries to justify the founders' termination by alleging multiple counts of neglect at best and an elaborate ploy of corporate espionage at worst. I basically spent hours just reading through these two documents side by side, trying to learn each side's stories, pretty much reading in between the lines, all in order to at least get a glimpse of the truth. But honestly, after spending all that time going through these two documents, I'm just more confused than ever. But there are some elements of the story that are much clearer now. KRAFTON, through Unknown Worlds, basically leaked, or rather presented in their countersuit, a lot of evidence, including actual DMs in between company employees and some of the founders on Slack, that really suggests that there was indeed a form of neglect going on from the side of the founders. Charlie Cleveland, the former CEO of Unknown Worlds, was inactive throughout the duration of Subnautica 2's development, to the point that a lead developer of the game couldn't even get a hold of him. Instead of working on Subnautica 2, this guy was basically working on a completely different project under another one of his companies, Abyssal Films, working not on games, but making movies instead. This was happening even during the time that he was seated as the CEO, and all throughout his tenure after he demoted himself to franchise creative director up until his termination. So this guy, despite being the CEO of the company, wasn't even active for the development of their biggest project to date. Instead, this guy was skittering about doing literally anything else except actually working on Subnautica 2. But to his defense, he's basically suggesting that he was actually working on a Subnautica movie, which would be awesome if he has any files or documents backing this claim. But I haven't really seen any at the moment. Comment down below if you've seen or heard anything about the Subnautica movie. The only thing going for him is his word that KRAFTON's CEO Chang-Hen Kim allegedly wanted Sir Cleveland over here to develop Subnautica's franchise IP by expanding the scope to television or movies. As for Max Maguire, I think what happened to this guy was he worked really hard and overtime to really make Moonbreaker work, but it was just a game that nobody was really interested in playing. If you aren't familiar with Moonbreaker, it was this obscure tabletop turn-based strategy PvP game that sold for a premium and was basically supposed to be Max Maguire's magnum opus. But if only they released that game as a free-to-play title instead, especially considering that the landscape of online competitive games being mostly free-to-play these days, then maybe they could have found an audience for it. It's a game that already looks like Hearthstone, so there probably was a market for Moonbreaker in the free-to-play demographic, but that's just my thoughts on the matter, and I can't really say for certain if it would have been better as such, but I digress. So Moonbreaker was basically a financial failure for both Unknown Worlds and KRAFTON, even despite the insane efforts that Max Maguire put into this project. And if effort would always account for sales, then a lot of people would be billionaires by now. And after the grace period for Moonbreaker finally passed, and any hopes of reinvigorating the project disappeared along with it, so did Max Maguire's motivation to do any kind of work involving game development, including work on Subnautica 2. Now, I can kind of sympathize with Max Maguire. I can only imagine pouring your heart and soul into a project with budgets of probably over $1 million at least. There's actually no report about how much Moonbreaker cost to make, but only for it to be branded as a huge financial failure, staining the brand of your company and your personal legacy flushed down the drain. That really must have sucked. And if that shit happened to me, I'd probably just quit and retire at that point. And I guess that was a plan for Max Maguire, only he didn't really quit yet because he was probably waiting for his piece of the $250 million retirement fund. Ted Gill, on the other hand, is basically being branded as the mastermind behind the corporate espionage to secure the $250 million earnout. Even as early as back in 2022, an unnamed Unknown Worlds exec was pretty sure that Ted Gill would concoct some sort of scheme to get them the earnout. This is 100% hearsay right now, know, but it can easily be corroborated when these filings are taken to court one day, if it ever gets to that point. So KRAFTON, or technically Unknown Worlds, is basically alleging that Ted Gill was framing development timelines to get them to align in a certain way, so that new releases would come out across 4 consecutive quarters to ultimately result in getting the maximum payout from the $250 million earnout. Was this illegal or a breach of contract for that matter? Probably not. KRAFTON's framing it like this guy is basically doing something really shady behind the scenes, but keep in mind that earning revenue is the bottom line to these companies, or to any company for that matter. So why KRAFTON is so worried that Unknown Worlds will hit the sales figures is absolutely beyond me. Shouldn't they be happy that these guys are planning to earn their company money? I don't know. All I can logically come up with is that there is something else going on behind the scenes that KRAFTON is hiding from everyone, including Unknown Worlds. But to keep it fair, I want to at least try and argue KRAFTON's side using unverified but plausible assumptions. Just what if Unknown Worlds successfully hit the sales figures, earned the full $250 million earnout, and the central figures and maybe even some of the developers in that studio that gets a slice of that pie straight up just dips in the middle of development, leaving KRAFTON with their dicks in their hands with an unfinished game that none of them know how to make, and with employees that are still dependent on their seniors for that project. Now, that sounds like a completely valid concern for KRAFTON, especially if Subnautica 2 releases as a very substandard game, irregardless of its early access status, because fans of Subnautica will eat that shit up day one. KRAFTON pays the earnout, and then the central figures of the studio could just straight up abandon the project is what I think worries KRAFTON and why drastic measures have been taken. But then again, the founders have also cited multiple instances of KRAFTON breaking written and notarized agreements stipulated in the EPA written during KRAFTON's acquisition of Unknown Worlds, including KRAFTON promising to leave creative and operation control in the hands of the founders, including release date windows and development decisions, KRAFTON promising to consult the founders before they do anything that could harm the earnout, KRAFTON promising to not take any action to prevent Unknown Worlds from earning the earnout, and KRAFTON promising not to terminate the founders without cause. All of these stipulated in their EPA and referenced within the founders' filing. Now, the full version of the KRAFTON x Unknown Worlds EPA documents aren't available to the public, but it would be really stupid for the founders or their legal representatives to file a legal complaint against an entity while citing bogus references to a legally binding document. So, to a certain extent, we can kind of somewhat take their word here, that there are clauses in their EPA that prevents KRAFTON from doing certain things, but they did it anyway, essentially breaking the agreement. But here is where it gets really interesting. Within the EPA, KRAFTON alleges that there is a clause within the EPA that the key employees agree that they would lose their operational control with Unknown Worlds, including with respect to game development and release, if the key employees fail to abide by certain conditions. But the specifics of these conditions largely remains unknown except for one that KRAFTON and the founders have each referenced for their filing. In the founders' filing, they are saying that the only justification or causes that KRAFTON can use to terminate any of the key employees are if they 1. Committed a felony, 2. Performed an intentional act of fraud or dishonesty, 3. Intentionally acted upon a wrongful disclosure of trade secrets, or 4. A willful act or omission by such individual that constitutes gross misconduct that is injurious to Unknown Worlds. And KRAFTON is trying to counter this by accusing the founders of collectively running off with over 170,000 downloaded confidential information that they made off with right before their terminations all the way back in July. KRAFTON references the stipulations within the EPA that each employee agreed to not disclose or use any of Unknown Worlds' confidential information, which broadly includes any internal business information, customer contracts, data and internal analysis, and intellectual property. And this is basically KRAFTON's main way of undermining the founders' claims that KRAFTON terminated them without proper cause. But the problem here is, this pretty much happened after the founders were already due for termination, so it's going to be really difficult for KRAFTON to prove the validity of this justification in regards to the termination of the key employees or the founders. So instead, they are adding the fact that it is explicitly written in the EPA and is one of the very reasons why they even agreed to the acquisition in the first place, is that the key employees agreed to serve specific roles in Unknown Worlds post-acquisition. Charlie Cleveland agreed to be the CEO and game director, Ted Gill agreed to be the company's president, and Max McGuire agreed to serve as technical director. But what happened was, Charlie Cleveland was basically inactive and refused to do his job as the CEO and game director of Unknown Worlds, obviously because of his focus shifting from working on Subnautica 2 to working on whatever the fuck films or movies he's making right now, resulting in a lack of direction in regards to the development of Subnautica 2, and he even went as far as to demote himself from CEO and game director to franchise creative director. And we have a similar case for Max McGuire announcing in January 2024 that he was hiring a new technical director, explaining or arguing that his job has quote-unquote diverged from his skills and interests, and has stopped using the title years ago and only did bits and pieces of the job as needed. And Ted Gill, seated as the company's president, allegedly spent years in concocting an elaborate corporate espionage to earn the maximum $250 million earnout without regard to the future and stability of the company being Unknown Worlds. What the key employees are planning to do once they finally get their hands on their portion of the earnout is entirely speculative, but it seems very likely that they'll dip once they get the earnout and leave Unknown Worlds cold turkey, despite their posts on social media pleading otherwise. Honestly, both sides seem to be trying their best to control the narrative. We can see some semblance of the truth to what both sides are saying with some bits and pieces of information that is corroborated by them both. But other than that, they're basically saying the other side is bad. Who I'm really interested in hearing from, and is something not really talked about regarding this issue, is the side and perspective of the employees that were working in Unknown Worlds when all of this was happening. I believe that they can give some much needed insight regarding this drama by even just sharing the absolute bare minimum info, like what was working for the company during this time was like, were they getting any work done, and are there any conflicts or disagreements happening within the company. And I want to hear the info from one of the base employees or the grunts inside the Unknown Worlds, because the current execs within the company are probably just trying to their best to keep their jobs at this moment, so I highly doubt that they'll give any relevant information for that matter. We're gonna need someone that's working in that company that doesn't really have anything to lose to shed some light on this issue, to finally figure out who's in the wrong and who's hiding what. Oh, don't do that. I'm just talking in hypotheticals here. If you are working in Unknown Worlds and are watching this video and are looking for a reason to speak up, this ain't it. Trust me, bro, it ain't worth it. Keep your job for now and then just get interviewed by some gaming outlet after your career takes off, years down the line. What we can all really do right now is to just simply wait and have the courts decide who's wrong and who's right. Not that I trust the court to make the proper decision, rather I don't really have any skin in this game, and ultimately I don't really care who's going to win or who's going to lose this lawsuit. I basically made this video just for content, but all I really want to know, what I really want to know, is if we're still getting a proper Subnautica 2. Because obviously, the founders of Subnautica are pretty much out of the picture at this point, and I really don't trust KRAFTON, of all people, to make a solid Subnautica 2 experience out of the remnants of what is the current Unknown Worlds. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Hit like if you like the video, subscribe for more gaming schlopics such as this, and comment down below your thoughts on the matter. Feel free to start a discussion there, and I'll also try to respond to you guys' comments whenever I can. But for now, bye-bye.
Get your shitty videos right here. Watch more, drop more views. We'll be back with more, so stay tuned to RevoRadio.